Without a doubt, it was Biff Farnham whose voice Brown had recognized, ordering his men to shoot. It was Farnham who had disappeared in the direction of the Little Yankee mine entrance. What new mischief was the desperate gambler involved in? What other tragedy was about to happen out there in the dark night? Chapter 27. Carlton could never later recall hearing any report, yet as he crossed the threshold, a bright burst of red fire split the darkness to his left. As if this was a signal, he leaped forward recklessly, running blindly along the narrow path towards the ore dump. Some memory trick led him to recall a peculiar turn in the trail just below the upper edge of the canyon. It must have been around there that he saw the flash, and he threw himself over the edge, extending both hands to protect his eyes in case he collided with any obstacles in the darkness. The deep shadows blinded him, but he didn't hesitate, some instinct urging him to hurry. He stumbled and fell flat on his face once, but quickly got back up, bruised but not seriously injured. His gun was pulled from his belt, but he didn't stop to search for it. Even as he regained his footing, his mind bewildered by the shock, he could clearly hear the cry of a woman, the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush. It came from his right, and he flung himself directly into the dense shrubbery in the direction from where the sound originated. He had no idea what new terror awaited him, what danger lurked in his path. At that moment, he didn't care. Hatless, desperately pushing aside the obstructing branches, his heart pounding, his clothes torn, his determined face pale, he struggled forward, stumbling, crawling, fighting his way through until he finally emerged, breathless but determined, into a small cove that extended into the rock wall. From exertion and excitement, he trembled from head to toe, sweat dripping from his face. He stopped. The sight that greeted him momentarily paralyzed him, rendering him speechless and motionless. Halfway across the open space, barely visible in the starlight, her long hair disheveled and wildly flying around her shoulders, the glimmer of a weapon in her hand, seemingly frozen in the act of fleeing, her terror-filled eyes staring back at him, stood Alyssa Ornish. In that initial moment, he saw nothing else, his thoughts consumed by her, by the immense danger that had transformed the girl. With outstretched hands, he took a quick step towards her, wondering why she crouched and recoiled before him, as if struck dumb by fear. Then he saw. There, between them, right at his feet, the face upturned and ghastly, the hands still clenched as if in a struggle, lay the lifeless body of Biff Farnham. Mesmerized by the sight, Carlton stared at it, involuntarily pulling away as the full extent of this terrible horror dawned on him. She had killed him. Driven to the act by desperation, pushed to it by insult and injury, pushed beyond the limits of human endurance, she had taken the man's life. This was the only fact he could grasp, the only thing he could comprehend. It enveloped him like a profound darkness. In the intense agony of that moment of understanding, Carlton remembered how she had once admitted to being tempted to commit the act, how she had even openly threatened it in a burst of sudden anger if this man ever pursued her again. He had done it, and she had kept her promise. He had taken a risk, and she had fought back. No one could blame her under any circumstances. However, the man's heart sank, leaving him weak and dizzy like a drunkard, as he realized what this must mean for her, for him, for the whole world. Whether it was right or wrong, justified or unjustified, the law's decision meant murder, and society would ostracize her. It felt like he couldn't breathe. His mind was spinning. He saw it all in an instant, the arrest, the accusing fingers, the bitter exposure, the agonizing trial, the devastated woman trembling before the judges. Oh God, it was too much. But what could he do? How could he protect her from the consequences of this terrible deed? The law. He didn't care about the law, knowing her life story, knowing that he still loved her. For a moment, the man completely forgot about himself, consumed by his anguish for her. This would undoubtedly push them further apart than ever before, yet he refused to dwell on that. He only focused on what he could do now to help her. He ripped open his shirt to get some air, his dull eyes desperately searching from the dead body to where she stood, her hands pressed against her head, her wide eyes staring at him as if she were facing a ghost. Her posture alone startled him, filled with unspeakable horror and blatant terror. Suddenly she let out a sharp cry, halfway between a sob and a gasp, escaping from her throat. "Oh, my God! My God! You!" The sound of her voice, unnatural and inhuman as it was, snapped him back to reality. "Yes, Alyssa, yes," he croaked hoarsely through parched lips, stepping towards her, crossing over the lifeless body. "You don't have to be afraid of me." She quickly moved away from him, extending her hands as if pushing him away, with a look of immense horror on her face. You. Oh, my God," she kept repeating. Look there. He is dead, dead, dead. I found him there. Oh, my God." His face was so pale in the moonlight. I heard the words and the gunshot. She covered her eyes with both hands, as if trying to erase the image. "I swear I heard it. I don't know why I came here, but I found him there dead. Dead. I was all alone in the dark. I had to touch him to make sure, and then it was you." Yes, he said, realizing she was desperately trying to prove her innocence, but his only concern was how to comfort her, deeply disturbed by her words and demeanor. "I know. I understand you found him there in the dark, and it has terrified you." He moved closer, extending his own hands, hoping she would come to him, but instead she recoiled like a frightened child, anticipating punishment, her arms raised to shield her face. No, don't touch me, she cried. "I'm not afraid of you, but I couldn't bear it." "Alyssa." He forced his voice to sound stern, now confident that this hysteria could only be controlled through his own willpower. "You must listen to me and follow my guidance. You will do as I say. This is a truly terrible event, but it's too late to fix it now. We can't bring back the dead. We must face the reality and do our best for the future. This man is dead. How he died doesn't matter to us anymore. You must leave this place immediately." "And leave him alone?" The whispered words hurt him, as his troubled mind misinterpreted the meaning. "Has he meant so much to you that you must now needlessly sacrifice yourself for him?" he asked quickly. "No, not that. A shudder ran through her body. "But he was my husband. You forget." "I do not forget. God knows it has been a heavy burden for me, but you have no further obligation here, neither to him. You owe it to yourself and to me." "To me?" "Yes, to me. I will put it that way if it will only motivate you to take action. I will not leave you here alone to suffer for this. If you stay, I stay. For heaven's sake, Alyssa, I implore you to go. I beg you to follow my guidance in this." "You will go with me?" Her voice trembling, yet showing a hint of interest for the first time. "If I go, you will go?" Yes. "Can you imagine that I would ever allow you to go alone? Do you promise me?" She still held her head between her hands, her disheveled hair flowing down past her waist, her dark eyes wild and filled with terror, searching the darkness as if trying to penetrate it. "Oh, my God! I don't know," she cried in a breathless sob. "I don't know. Why won't you go? Why won't you go and leave me here with him until someone else comes? I cannot comprehend. My mind is in turmoil. But that would be better, yes. Do that. I am not afraid of him." He firmly grasped her outstretched hand. She shuddered, as if the contact was painful, yet made no attempt to escape, her eyes widening as she looked at him. "No, I won't take a single step without you," he said, holding her tightly. His expression had turned serious, realizing that his only chance of influencing her decision was through this. "Do you really think I'm such a coward, Alyssa? We both understand the harm this man has caused, the wickedness of his life, and the reasons that led to this act. He deserved it all. This isn't the time for blame. If we wanted to help him, staying here now wouldn't achieve anything. Others will find the body and give it the proper attention. But oh my God, do you realize what it will inevitably mean for us to be discovered here? The shame, the disgrace, the likelihood of being arrested and convicted, the ruthless exposure of everything. I beg you to consider all of this and not hesitate any longer. We don't have time for that. Leave with me before it's too late. I think I know a way out, and if we act fast, there's a chance. But even the slightest delay could close off every possible escape route. Alyssa, block out everything else and tell me you'll go." His voice carried an intense agony that seemed to completely break her down. Tears filled her eyes, and she lowered her head. "And?" she asked, as if the idea hadn't fully registered. "You won't go without me?" "No, no matter what happens, I won't," he reassured her. She lifted her pale and tired face, looking at him through her teary vision, no longer wide-eyed with fear. "Then I have to go. I have to go," she exclaimed, a shudder running through her. "God help me, I have to go." For a moment she stared blankly at the motionless body on the ground, its ghostly face turned towards the stars. Her own face was as pale as the dead, and she pressed back her dark hair with one hand. She staggered from sudden dizziness, yet before he could offer her support, she had collapsed onto her knees, with her head bowed low, her long hair trailing on the ground. Alyssa, he cried in an intense fear. She looked up at him, her expression filled with earnest pleading. Yes, I will go," she said, her words trembling. "But let me pray first." He stood still above her, his heart pounding, his own eyes lowered to the ground. He was aware of her lips moving, yet he could never later recall even a fragmented sentence of that prayer. Perhaps it was too sacred even for his ears, only to be understood by the boundless love of God. She stopped speaking eventually, her soft voice fading into an incoherent whisper, yet she remained kneeling there motionless, with only her suppressed sobbing audible. Urged by the need for haste, Carlton gently touched her shoulder. "Come, my girl," he said, the sight of her suffering almost unbearable for him. "You have done all you can here now." She rose to her feet slowly, never looking at him, seemingly unaware of his presence. He noticed the tightness in her throat, as if the effort to breathe choked her, the rapid spasmodic rising and falling of her chest, and clenched his teeth, struggling against the strain on his own nerves. "Will you go with me now?" She glanced at him, her eyes dull, unresponsive. "Oh, yes, now," she answered, as if the words were spoken automatically. He guided her away, disregarding her constant attempts, as they climbed the hill, to look back over his shoulder. Eventually, the intervening branches completely concealed that pale, lifeless face below, and as if all remaining willpower or physical strength had vanished with it, the girl rested her head against him, swaying blindly as she walked. Without saying a word, he pulled her close, his face being brushed by her blowing hair, her hand tightly gripping his shoulder. This was how they emerged into the starry night on the ridge summit. As they moved slowly, he tried repeatedly to speak, to offer some words of comfort, of understanding. But he couldn't, as her partially revealed face, glimpsed briefly, left him speechless. Deep in his heart, he knew that her distress exceeded the power of words. Someone stood in front of the cabin. His eyes noticed the figure as they approached, and he couldn't bring himself to mention this horrifying sight in her presence. "Alyssa," he said gently, having to touch her to get her attention. "I want you to stay here and wait while I make arrangements for our journey. You're not scared, right?" "No," she replied, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I'm not scared." "You'll stay here?" She looked at him, her face blank, as if she didn't understand. However, when he pointed at the stone, she sat down. "Yes," she answered, speaking those ordinary words hesitantly, as if they were from an unfamiliar foreign language. "I'll do what you say." She wearily bent down, burying her head in her hands. Carlton hesitated for a moment, afraid to leave her, but she didn't move, so he finally turned away, walking directly towards the vague figure standing by the cabin door. As he got closer, he recognized the old miner, his rifle half raised suspiciously towards the visitor. It had to be done, and the engineer approached the task directly. "Has Brown returned?" "Sure, he's in there now," Hicks replied, cautiously studying the face of the person asking the question, while pointing back towards the dark cabin. "He came in a while ago, didn't say a word to me, but just pushed past to the bed and kneeled down with his face in the bed sheets." He hasn't moved or spoken since. I went in once and tried to talk to him, but he didn't even budge or look at me. I tell you, Mr. Carlton, it just doesn't seem natural. It's not at all like Stutter to act this way. I couldn't bear it any longer and had to step outside for some fresh air. Damn, but it makes me sick. This has been a terrible night, the younger man said seriously, placing his hand on the other's shoulder. I hope never to go through such another one. But we're not finished yet. Hicks, Farnham has been shot and killed. His body is lying over there in that little cove just past the trail. You'll have to take care of it because I'm going to get his wife away from here immediately. You're what? I'm going to take Miss Ornish away now tonight. I'm going to take her across to Daggett Station to catch the eastbound train. Hicks stared at him wide-eyed, gradually comprehending the full meaning of all this. Good God, do you think she did it? He asked incredulously. Carlton shook him, grinding his teeth together angrily. Damn you! It doesn't matter what I think, he exclaimed fiercely, his nerves pulsating. All you need to know is that she's leaving. Leaving tonight. Going to Daggett Station, to Denver, to wherever she can be safe and never found. Do you understand that? She's going with me, and you're going to help us, and you're going to do your part without asking any more foolish questions. What is it you want? Your horse, and the pony Mercedes was riding. Hicks let out a harsh curse, which seemed to growl, rumbling in his thin throat. But listen, Carlton, he passionately objected. Just look at the predicament you're putting us in here at the Little Yankee. We desperately need your testimony, and we need it urgently. Carlton slammed his hand against the log, releasing a small outlet for his emotions. Hicks, I never thought you were foolish. You know better than that if you just take a moment to think. This matter regarding the claim is already resolved. The whole issue started with Farnham, and he's deceased now. Michoro will bury him. The sheriff is present, and he's already starting to comprehend this situation. He's willing to assist you. Now all you have to do is swear out warrants for Farnham's partners and present evidence of the tunnel running along your vein. It's as simple as can be, now that you're aware of its existence. They can't defeat you, and you don't need a single word of testimony from me. But that poor girl needs me. She's almost driven to madness by this ordeal, and I'm going with her, even if I have to fight my way out of here with a rifle. That's the bottom line. Either you give me those horses or I'll take them. Old Hicks stared into the stern face confronting him so menacingly, slowly grasping the entire situation in his mind. Goodness gracious, he finally exclaimed, almost apologetically. You don't have to resort to anything like that. No, not at all. I think highly of you, and I care for the girl. You can bet on that, and I'm truly relieved that Farnham is defeated. Of course, I'll assist both of you. I suppose Stutter wouldn't be of any use as a guide tonight, but I can show you the way down the ravine. The rest is just riding. You can leave those horses with the section boss at Daggett until I come for them. Chapter 28. In the years that followed, Carlton could never quite remember the events of that fateful night's journey through the desert. The fog that clouded his mind would never completely dissipate. Except for a few disconnected details, the surroundings of that journey remained unclear, hazy, and vague. He recalled the vast, scorching desert, the stars shining above them like numerous eyes, the massive, ragged edge of cloud in the west, the uneven, castle-like range of hills behind them, the monotonous expanse of plain stretching endlessly ahead, with no boundary other than the southern sky. The strange, ghostly shadows of cacti and yucca plants were everywhere. Peculiar, eerie sounds reached their ears from the emptiness, such as the distant cries of prowling wolves, the mournful sigh of the night breeze, the solitary hoot of a far-off owl. Only desolation greeted his wandering eyes, a complete and utter desolation, a mere wasteland of scattered sand, occasionally whitened by patches of alkaline under the daylight, but appearing brown, dull, and forsaken beyond words under the brooding shadows of the night, an unfathomable, deserted ocean of mystery, suffocating in its gloomy desolation. He traveled directly south, without following a trail, but rather guiding their path by the stars, firmly holding the reins in his right hand, and consistently urging his own horse to increase its speed. The one prevailing thought in his mind was the pressing need for haste, a fierce determination to intercept that early train heading eastward. Beyond this singular idea, his mind seemed to be in utter chaos, seemingly failing him. Any delay meant danger, discovery, and posed a threat to her very life. He comprehended that. He could strategize, lead, and take action in every way expected of a man driven by this inspiration. But everything else appeared to be in disarray. The future? There was no future. It could never exist again. A chasm of 1,000 years had suddenly opened between him and this woman. Merely gazing into those dreadful depths made his head spin. It could not be bridged. No sacrifice, no compensation could ever undo that fatal gunshot. He did not hold her responsible. He did not question her justification. But he understood that together they faced the inevitable. There was no way out, no clearing of the record. He had nothing left to do except this riding through the night with absolutely no purpose. Once he had guided her to safety, everything was finished forever. He had no other hopes, ambitions, or purposes in this world. The desert around them symbolized the upcoming existence, barren, lifeless, dull, and dead. He clenched his teeth fiercely to suppress the despairing cry that rose to his lips, partially lifting himself in the stirrups to glance back at her. If she noticed anything, there was no sign of it in her eyes. Without any sparkle, unwavering, they stared straight ahead into the darkness, her face pale and almost expressionless. The sight chilled him to the bone and made him feel nauseous, his free hand gripping the saddle handle as if he could crush the leather. Yet he remained silent, as there was nothing to be said. Between the two of them, there was a grim, awful, unchangeable fact. In the face of it, words were meaningless and pitiful. He had never known before that she could ride, but he knew it now. His gaze observed the secure way she sat in the saddle, her slender figure swaying effortlessly with the pony's movements, seemingly unaware of the rough journey or the speed of their progress. She had pulled back her long hair and fixed it in place with some mysterious method, so now her face was revealed without shadows, clearly visible in the starlight. Dazed, devoid of expression, it almost seemed lifeless in that faint glow, and yet he loved it, his moistened eyes tenderly tracing every visible feature. God, this beautiful woman meant everything to him. Despite everything, his heart still belonged to her. It was fate, not a lack of love or loyalty, that now kept them apart, turning their future into a path of bitterness. In his confused mind, he resisted it, desperately searching for a way out, blindly asserting that love could even erase this event in time, could eliminate the wrongdoing, making it seem as if it never happened. However, he knew better. Once she broke the silence, her voice sounding unfamiliar, her eyes still fixed on the darkness ahead. "Isn't this Mercedes' horse? I thought she rode away on him herself." With those words, he remembered that she was not yet aware of the other tragedy. It was a difficult task, but he faced it courageously. As calmly as possible, he recounted the heartbreaking story as far as he understood it, including the love, the sacrifice, and the suffering. While she listened, her head gradually drooped lower, and he saw tears glistening as they fell freely. He was relieved that she could cry. It was better than that lifeless, empty gaze. As he finished, describing Stutter's grieving presence by the bedside, she looked at him solemnly, tears still clinging to her long lashes. It was for the best, much better. I understand how she felt, for she has confided in me. God showed her mercy. Her soft voice broke into a sob. But for me there is no mercy. Alyssa, don't say that. My dear, don't say that. The future is long, it might still lead to happiness. True love can endure even the memory of this night. She wearily shook her head, sinking back into the saddle. Yes, she said seriously, love may, and I believe will, endure everything. It is everlasting. But even love cannot undo the action. Nothing ever can. No power of God or man. He did not try to respond, knowing deep in his own heart that her words were true. For a moment she continued staring at him, hoping that he might say something, anything that could give her a glimmer of hope. Then, with a weary sigh, she looked away, fixing her gaze straight ahead. His silence spoke volumes, confirming the bleakness of their future. Despite being alive, there was a gaping void between them, as if death itself stood in their way. The dawn arrived, gray and misty, creeping across the desolate landscape like a ghostly presence. This new day held nothing but despair for the two of them. They greeted its slow arrival with tired, dull eyes, devoid of any welcome. In that eerie twilight, the desolate expanse of sand stretched out, even more desolate and lonely than in the darkness. The scars of alkali marred the distance, making the gaunt cacti appear twisted and merciless. The horses trudged forward, pushed on by the constant urging of the spurs. Exhausted, their heads hung low, their sides damp with sweat, their hooves dragging through the sand. The woman remained motionless, seemingly oblivious to the approaching dawn. However, Carlton stirred, lifting his head to peer wearily ahead. Under the gray light that spread out like a curtain, he spotted a shabby red section house ahead, with a large rusty water tank silhouetted against the sky. Below, a small patch of vivid green grass was enclosed by a narrow stream of flowing water. At first he thought it was a mirage and rubbed his tired eyes to confirm its reality. Then he realized that they had ridden through the night and had arrived at Daggett Station. Without a word, without even exchanging a glance, he helped her dismount from the saddle, gently supporting her as she trembled. Finally, he half-carried her in his arms to a crude bench on a small platform. The horses he set free to find their own grazing and water, and then returned, unsure and filled with vague worry, to where she sat, staring wide-eyed out into the desolation of sand. He brought with him a metal cup filled with water and placed it in her hand. She drank it down eagerly. "Thanks," she said, her voice sounding more natural. "Is there anything else, Alyssa? Could you eat something?" "No, nothing. I'm just exhausted, oh, so exhausted in both body and mind. Let me sit here quietly until the train arrives. Will that be long?" He pointed far off to the west, along those parallel tracks now starting to shine in the sunlight. On the outer edge of the desert, a dark spiral of smoke was rising into the horizon. "It's coming now. We didn't have much time to spare." "Is it a fast train? Are you sure it will stop here?" To both questions, yes, he replied, relieved to see her show some renewed interest. "They all stop here for water. It's a long journey from this place to Timmins Junction." She said nothing in response, her gaze fixed far down the track where those spirals of smoke were becoming more and more visible. In the growing light of the morning, he could see how the long night had etched new lines of weariness on her face, had brought new shadows of concern. It wasn't just the dull, lifeless eyes, but also the hollows beneath them and the tense lips, all combining to tell the tale of physical exhaustion and almost unbearable heartache. Unable to bear the sight, Carlton turned away, walking to the end of the short platform, staring aimlessly into the harsh desert, fighting bravely to conquer himself. This was a struggle, an unrelenting struggle for both of them. He must do nothing, say nothing that would weaken her or add an ounce to her burden. He returned once more, his lips tightly sealed in restraint. "Our train is almost here," he said, lacking a better way to break the tense silence. She looked around uncertainly, first towards the still distant train, then up at his face. "When is the local train from the east expected to arrive? Do you know?" "Probably an hour later than the express. At least I assume so, based on its arrival time at Timmins," he replied, taken aback by the question. "Why do you ask?" She didn't smile or move except to lean slightly forward, her eyes dropping from his face to the platform. "Would it be too much if I were to ask you to allow me to take this first train alone?" she asked, her voice faltering, her hands trembling as they clasped in her lap. His initial bewildered surprise prevented him from speaking. He could only gaze at her in stunned disbelief. Then something in her downcast expression filled him with pity. "Alyssa," he exclaimed, barely aware of the words he used. "Do you mean that? Is it your desire for us to part ways here?" "Oh, no, not that." She hurriedly rose, gripping the back of the bench with one hand and extending the other. "Don't phrase it like that. Such an action would be cruel, unjustified. But I am so exhausted, so utterly worn out. It has felt as though my mind has been on fire all night. Every step of the horse has been torture. Oh, I just want to be alone, completely alone. I need to contemplate this. I need to confront it all by myself. Dear God, it seems as if I'll go insane unless I can be alone, unless I can find some solace for my soul. Do not blame me. Do not look at me like that, but be merciful if you still love me. Let me be alone. He grasped the extended hand, bending low over it, unwilling in that moment that she should look upon his face. Again and again he pressed his dry lips upon the soft flesh. I do love you, Alyssa, he said at last, chokingly. Love you always, despite everything. I will do now as you say. Your train is already here. You know my address in Denver. Don't make this forever, Alyssa. Don't do that. She did not answer him. Her lips quivered, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment. In their depths, he believed he read the answer of her heart and tried to be content. As the great cross-country train paused momentarily to quench its thirst, the porter of the sleeper car, who, to his surprise, had been called to place his carpeted step on the platform of this desert station, stared in undisguised amazement at those two figures before him. A man bareheaded, his clothing worn and disreputable, half supporting a woman who was without a hat, pale-faced and trembling like a frightened child. Yes, sir. Entire section vacant, sir. Number 5. Denver. Yes, sir, certainly. Oh, I'll take care of the lady just fine. You're not going along with us, then, this trip? Oh, yes, thank you, sir. Absolutely. I'll make sure she gets there. Don't you worry about that. Carlton walked restlessly down the platform, gazing up at the car windows, summoning all of his gathered resolve necessary to keep himself outwardly calm. Many of the curtains were closed, but finally he spotted her, leaning against the glass, that same dull, lifeless look in her eyes as she stared out blindly across the expanse of sand. As the train started, he touched the window, and she turned and saw him. There was a solitary moment when life surged back into her eyes, when he thought he even saw her lips curl into a smile directed at him. Then he stood alone, staring down the track as the rapidly vanishing train receded into the distance. Chapter 29. There followed 3 years of silence, 3 years of waiting for that message which never arrived. As though she had disappeared completely, Alyssa Ornish vanished. Carlton no longer had even a glimmer of hope that he would ever receive a word from her, and there were moments when he wondered if it might be for the best, if in the end she had made the right choice. Love, pure and untarnished, resided in his heart. However, as she had informed him out in the desert, love could never undo the act. That act remained dark, somber, unblemished, an unchangeable mark of death. So why should they meet? Why should they even attempt to learn about each other? Whether they were near or far, there existed an insurmountable divide between them. Silence was preferable. Silence and the mercy of fading memories. Carlton had worked diligently during those years, partly out of a natural inclination, partly to escape his heartaches. With great fervor he had taken on the tasks before him, immersing himself in thoughts of other matters. Through such labor he had achieved success, for he played his part in subjugating nature to mankind, thereby earning a reputation that already placed him in high regard among the mining experts of the American West. His name had become renowned in the mountains and mining camps. Throughout the lengthy months, he had clung to hope with great intensity. Yet he had made no effort to find her or uncover her secret. Deep within his heart, he held a reverence for her decision, and he would have considered it almost criminal to intrude upon the privacy that her continued silence had established. Therefore he steadfastly kept the secret locked within his own soul, growing more serene in demeanor, more reserved in speech, with each passing month of waiting, constantly striving to forget the past amid a multitude of business and professional responsibilities. It was at the end of a winter day in Chicago. Snow clouds were rushing in from over the gray-colored waters of the lake, bringing with them an early evening. Already countless lights were sparkling in the tall office buildings, shining brightly above the smooth pavement of Michigan Avenue. The never-ending flow of vehicles heading home started to thicken, and the wide road became a scene of constant movement and spectacle. After quickly checking the hefty pages of a city directory in a nearby pharmacy, a young man, dressed in a dark business suit, his broad shoulders resembling those of an athlete, his face strongly defined and full of character, and tanned even during this time of year from outdoor living, hurried across the street and entered the bustling entrance of the Railway Exchange Building. On the 7th floor, he forcefully opened a door with the desired number and stepped inside to face the office boy, who immediately frowned in disapproval. "Office hours are over," the latter announced curtly. "Just closing up." "I'm not here for business, my young friend," was the good-natured response, "but in the hope of catching Mr. Craig before he leaves." The boy, still somewhat uncertain, jerked his hand back towards an inner room. "Well, he's in there, but he's just about to leave." The visitor pushed aside the gate and entered. The man inside, busy closing his roll-top desk for the day, turned around in his chair, clearly annoyed by such a late visitor. For a moment he looked at the face, partly shaded in the dim light, then jumped to his feet, both hands warmly extended. "Ned Carleton, by all the gods!" he exclaimed, his voice full of warmth. "Wow, I'm so glad to see you, old friend. I thought it was some boring person wanting to discuss business, and this happens to be my busy night. By golly, I thought I would never be able to leave this darn desk. Always like that when a guy has plans. How are you, anyway? Looking great. Ready to play football right now, I bet. Still in Denver, I assume? The climate must be fantastic out there if you're a specimen. You must really like it. I mean, you're practically surrounded by mountains. Some of the old guys were talking about it the other day. Haven't been back east in a couple of years, have you, Ned?" "Quite a bit over 3, Bob, and only on important business now. I've been working hard all day, but I thought I'd take a chance at finding you here, even at this hour. I knew you have a natural inclination to work, you know. I'm taking a train to the west at midnight." "Well, I highly doubt that." And Craig grabbed his hat from the top of the desk. "Do you think I'll let you go that easily now that you're here?" "Well, definitely not. You have to give up that outing for at least one night, even if I have to get you arrested to keep you here. I can do it, too. I have connections with the police department. My car fines are making them rich." "But you just mentioned having a commitment, or rather a date, which I assume means the same thing." Craig smiled indulgently, his dark eyes filled with humor. "That's exactly right. It's good to see you keep up with the slang of today. It proves that you live in the real world, have a normal mind, and take an interest in current events. It's all very commendable. That commitment of mine happens to be the exact thing I need you for. It's the most exciting event in our family history, at least as far as I can remember. It probably even surpasses my birth in importance, but the details aren't clear. You will bring prestige to the occasion. By golly, it's going to be amazing. My parents will welcome you with open arms. People talk about you all the time, I swear they do, and I can't think of anyone else they'd rather have join in our little family celebration. Oh, this is a great night for Ireland. Stay? Well, of course you'll stay. But wait, Bob, just tell me what's really going on here. What am I getting myself into?" "We're going to a box party at the theater. Here, have a cigar. It's just a private event with family. It's the opening night. It's going to be a great crowd. Everything's sold out in advance. We'll have supper afterwards in a private dining room at the hotel. Just us. No other guests, except for the star and her manager." "The star? I didn't know you guys were into theater." "God, they never were. But they've had a change of heart. You see, Lizzie took to it like a fish to water. She was the youngest, you know, and by God, she's been successful. She's got people coming and going, and our father is so proud of her he can't stop smiling. It's amazing to see him show her off downtown, spending a lot of money at every step. Nothing is too good for Lizzie right now." "And she is the star?" "Yes, indeed. And she's going to have a big celebration if all signs are correct. Society has an inkling, and that means a beautiful turnout. The horse show will be old news. God, man, you can't afford to miss it. You'd never see anything like it in Denver in 1,000 years." Carleton laughed, unable to completely resist his friend's infectious enthusiasm. "You certainly make a strong case, Bob. But honestly, if I did stay overnight, I'd much rather spend the time catching up on old times. With all due respect to your sister, my friend, I confess I'm not really interested in the theater. I've distanced myself from it. Haven't even stepped foot in a theater for years. Figured as much, completely immersed in work. Big mistake at your age. An evening like the one Lizzie can provide you will be eye-opening. Listen, Ned, that girl is an actress. I'm not saying it because she's my sister, but she truly is. Everyone is raving about her, even the critics. That's one reason why I want you to stay. I'm incredibly proud of my little sister. But I don't have my formal attire anywhere near here. So what? I don't have the time to go back to the house and change into mine. I'm not a quick change artist. Lizzie won't mind. She's sensible. And the others can go to hell. Come on, Ned. Let's go to the Chicago Club, grab a bite, then have a smoke and chat about our alma mater. After that, we'll head to the Grand. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. The Grand Opera House was packed from the pit to the ceiling, the boxes and orchestra section filled with vibrant colors and fashionable attire, the countless rows of seats above, filled with eager spectators. Before 8 o'clock, latecomers in the lobby were met with the standing room only sign, and now even that had been hidden away, while the ticket attendant shook their head at disappointed inquiries. And what an audience it was, one to be remembered, to be considered remarkable, to be discussed in newspaper editorials the following morning. There was a reason for it. A native of Chicago, a daughter of a prominent and exclusive family who had achieved great success in San Francisco, London, and New York, had finally agreed to return home and perform for the first time in her hometown. Endowed with exceptional talents of interpretation, passionate, sincere, persuasive, loving her work fervently, possessing an appealing presence and natural aptitude for study, she had long ago gained the appreciation of the critics and the warm admiration of those who appreciate the highest standards in dramatic art. The reward was guaranteed. Already her return had been widely publicized as a significant event in the bustling city. Her name was on everyone's lips, and in the hearts of those who truly appreciate such matters, the enthusiasts of art, of lofty aspirations, of a stage worthy of its esteemed history. And in her case, in addition to all these advantageous elements, society suddenly became interested and captivated. The actress became a trend, a phenomenon, around which revolved the courtier and the socialite. Once, it was recalled, she had been one of them, part of their own circle, and from the depths of their small clique, they rose clamorously to the surface, believing, as always, that they were the rightful leaders of it all. And so it happened that on the premiere night, the stage dazzled, the theater filled with a dense crowd of fervent enthusiasts, bejeweled heads nodding from private boxes to the orchestra seats in recognition of friends, opera glasses insolently staring, voices buzzing in ceaseless conversation, and above it all, the frantic efforts of the orchestra to draw attention to itself amidst the glitter and spectacle. Completely indifferent to it all, Ned Carleton rested his elbow on the metal railing of the first box and casually surveyed the sea of unfamiliar faces. He would have much preferred not being there. To him, the theater merely served as a reminder of unpleasant memories. It was in this atmosphere that the past haunted him, and those hidden aspects of life returned to taunt him. He might occasionally forget, while hunched over his desk or wrestling with the perplexing challenges of his profession in the field. But not here. Not in the glare of the stage lights, amidst the buzz of the crowd. He crumpled the unread program in his hand, trying to casually engage in conversation with the woman sitting next to him, whom he was expected to entertain. But his mind was elsewhere, his eyes envisioning a gray, misty, silent expanse of desert, becoming increasingly clear in its horrifying desolation before the approaching dawn. The massive steel curtain reluctantly rose to the top of the stage arch. The chatter of voices ceased, allowing the struggling orchestra to be heard. Carleton clenched his teeth and anxiously waited, his hand tightly gripping the railing. Memory tormented him even more than he had anticipated. He would have gone out into the solitude of the street, but he knew it would disturb others. The accompanying music quickened as the inner curtain slowly ascended, revealing the grand stage set for the first act. He glanced at it casually, his thoughts elsewhere, yet vaguely aware of the sudden silence around him and the figures leaning forward, eager to catch the opening lines. The scene depicted a picturesque Swiss mountain village, vibrant in color and magnificently staged. For a moment, the scenery, with its majestic snow-capped peaks in the background, captured his attention. It was realistic, faithfully capturing nature's beauty, and he felt a sudden longing in his heart to be back home, to once again be in the shadow of the Rockies. However, the actors failed to captivate him, and his thoughts wandered once again. The act was nearly halfway through when the star finally made her entrance. Suddenly, the door of the chalet swung open, and a young woman emerged, dressed in peasant attire, nonchalantly twirling a hat in her hand, her radiant face beaming, her slender figure perfectly poised. She confidently stepped to the center of the wide stage, illuminated by countless lights, revealing the deep brown shade of her abundant hair, the intense dark eyes, and the sweet charm in her expression. This was the moment that massive audience had been waiting for. Like a sudden explosion of artillery, the thunderous applause erupted. Her first attempted speech was drowned out by the overwhelming praise. The actress stood before them, bowing and smiling, her unrouged cheeks flushed with red blood, her dark eyes shimmering like two diamonds. Time and time again, the crowd rose to their feet, the deafening noise of their welcome filling the air, and a deluge of flowers covered the stage. From boxes, orchestra seats, crowded balcony, and the highest balcony, the enthusiastic outbursts surged, spontaneous and continuously growing in volume. She looked out at them with an almost pleading expression, her hands outstretched in greeting, her eyes welling up with tears. Slowly, as if pulled towards them by a sense of gratitude, she descended to the front of the stage and stood there, bowing to the left and right, her heaving bosom revealing her agitation. As if a sudden memory had struck her amidst the chaos of what all this must mean to others, to her own family, she turned to lovingly gaze at the box where they sat. Immediately she went pale, her hands pressed against her chest, her throat constricting as if struggling to breathe. Perhaps those in the audience assumed it was part of her performance, or maybe a sudden nervous breakdown, for as she staggered back towards a bench for support, the clamor faded into a dull murmur. Almost as soon as the tumult subsided, she was on her feet once more, her lips still pale, her face contorted as if in pain. Before the startled audience could fully grasp the truth, she began speaking her lines, forcing them into silence, creating an atmosphere of hushed and breathless anticipation. Carlton sat leaning forward, gripping the railing, his eyes fixed on her. Apart from that one slender figure, the entire stage before him appeared empty. Suddenly he grabbed Craig's arm. "Who is she?" he asked sharply. "The one dressed as a peasant girl? Who is it? Are you out of your mind?" "That's Lizzie. Check your program, dude. She must have just had a moment of weakness. Oh my goodness, I thought she was going to collapse for a second." "You're looking pretty pale yourself, not feeling well, huh?" He shook his head, sinking back into his seat. Quickly he opened the pages of the crumpled program, his hand trembling so much that he could barely make out the printed lines. Ah, there it was in bold type. Renée LaRue, portrayed by Miss Alyssa Ornish. Chapter 30. Throughout the rest of the play, he sat in a state of shock, barely taking his eyes off the dazzling stage, yet only seeing her. He couldn't recall a single scene afterwards. During the intermissions, he engaged in rational conversations with those around him, congratulating her entourage on the spectacular success of the evening and praising the star's performance. However, this was all automatic, mechanical, with his mind barely registering his own actions. She never looked in his direction again. Throughout all 4 acts, she never once allowed her gaze to rest upon their box. Others may not have noticed this omission, but he did, and he interpreted her behavior as painful. It served to strengthen the determination that was taking hold of him. He also noticed that she played with feverish intensity, not exhibiting the calm restraint and promise of hidden power that had always been so evident in the past. It made him realize that she was pushing herself to the limit, relying solely on her willpower to endure the strain. The newspapers the following day commented on this, hinting at nervousness and the exhilaration that comes from such a remarkable reception. But Carlton understood the true cause. He knew the ghost that had suddenly appeared before her, causing her to turn pale and frightened at the very moment of her greatest triumph. There, right in front of everyone, under the bright lights, she had to suppress her emotions and achieve a victory even greater than that of the actress. At that moment, she had conquered herself, confidently stepping over the memories of the past that had resurfaced. After the curtain fell and rose again and again to allow her to stand in the spotlight, smiling and happily blowing kisses to the enthusiastic crowd, he left with the others, still somewhat dazed and unsure. As their car headed south, the cool night breeze on his face brought back clearer consciousness and a stronger determination. She had never wanted him. Not once in all those years had she uttered a single word. Now, on this night of her triumph and amidst the celebration of her family, he had no place. It had all been a mistake, a terribly unhappy mistake, but he would do everything in his power to make it right now. He wouldn't let his presence detract from her happiness or continue to make her uncomfortable. The past between them was over. Undoubtedly, she wanted it to stay that way. Well then, he would assist her in burying it, now and forever. He would ensure that the past never again haunted her during her moments of success. She had found her ideal. She had reached the pinnacle of her ambitions. She should be allowed to savor the victory without any disturbance. Inside the hotel lobby, illuminated by colorful lights, he stopped Craig and hurriedly approached the steward for a conversation. "I'm really sorry, my friend," he apologized, "but the truth is, I don't feel well enough to stay here for the feast. Nothing serious, just indigestion or something like that. I'll go up to my room and lie down for a while. If I feel better, I might come by later," Ned said. Craig looked worried. "You looked really pale all evening, probably from the lobster salad. I really didn't want to let you go, honestly. I wanted Lizzie to meet you. I've always spoken highly of you, and your absence will be a letdown for her. But if you're sick, well, there's nothing to be done. If you can, come down later, and I'll come up as soon as I can get away from the group. Are you sure you don't need a doctor from the house?" "Absolutely sure. All I need is some rest and sleep. I've been working too hard, and I'm completely exhausted," Ned replied. He sank into the comfortable armchair in his own room, not bothering to turn on the lights. He mechanically lit a cigar and stared out of the window. In front of him, dark cloud shadows loomed over the lake's dark water. Below, the constant clatter of hooves could be heard along the trendy street. He didn't see or hear any of it. He replayed the past in his mind, recalling every word and glance exchanged between them. He was once again with the Heart of the World performers, struggling with Burke in the depths of the mine, enduring the day and night of misfortune on the ridge overlooking Echo Canyon, and racing for their lives across the vast desert. It all played out before him with unnatural clarity, as if each scene had been painted on the dark sky outside. Then he saw the grand theater he had just left, the magnificent glow of lights, the echoing applause, the enthusiastic crowd of men and women, and her, bowing and smiling at them, her dark eyes filled with happiness, completely ignoring him, her entire body trembling with the thrill of success. Oh, it was all finished. Even if there had been no barrier of death between them, it was all finished. She had consciously chosen to forget. Under the influence of her art, she had forgotten. Her art had taken over her thoughts, her ambitions, her every ounce of energy. She had fought her way through the crowd, but the very struggle to achieve had pushed him out of her memory, leaving the past as empty as the desert they had separated in. He clenched his teeth, striking his closed fist against the cushioned arm of the chair. Then he sat in silence, his cigar extinguished. He glanced at his watch once, but it was already too late to hope for catching the westbound train, so he returned it to his pocket and remained motionless. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. It was probably Craig, and he called out a regretful, "Come in." A bellboy stood there, his buttoned-up figure outlined against the lights in the hallway. "A lady in Parlor D asked me to give you this, sir," the boy said. He took the small piece of paper, barely understanding what it could mean, turned on the dresser light, and examined it. A single line of delicate writing confronted him, so faint that he had to lean closer to read it. If you're waiting for my word, I send it. He grasped the edge of the dresser as if someone had struck him, staring down at the card in his hand, and then around the silent room, his breath quickening. Initially, the words held little meaning. Then the blood rushed to his face, and he walked towards the door. He paused there, his hand already on the doorknob. What's the point? Why should he pursue her, even if she asked him to come? She might not care anymore, but he did. For her, such a meeting might be a casual encounter, something to be lightly discussed. But for him, it would only be constant torment. But no, he was mistaken in his thoughts. Alyssa Ornish would not act in such a way. If she sent this message, it was done sincerely, done kindly. He would be a coward if he didn't face whatever awaited him downstairs. With tightly pressed lips, he closed the door and walked to the elevator. She stood alone, waiting for him slightly inside the parlor door, her cheeks flushed, her red lips slightly parted in an attempt to smile. With a single glance, he saw her as he always had. Supremely happy, her clear dark eyes, her slender figure swaying towards him as if welcoming him. For a moment their gazes met, his uncertain, hers confident. Then she reached out her two bare hands to him. "You scared me so much tonight," she said, trying to speak lightly. "And then to make things worse, you ran away. That's not like you." "I couldn't bring myself to ruin the rest of your evening," he explained, his words catching in his throat. "Being at the opera house was a mistake. I didn't realize it was you until it was too late. But the supper was different." She looked at him intently, her surprise clear in her expression. "I can't believe you're as indifferent as you're pretending to be," she finally said, her breath quickening. "One doesn't completely forget in just 3 short years, and I caught that one glimpse of you in the box. It was that look on your face that gave me the courage to send my card to your room." She paused, dropping her eyes to the floor, her fingers nervously fiddling with the trim of her waist. "It may sound strange, but despite my initial display of emotions upon discovering your presence, I had faith all day that you would come. Is it possible that you wanted me there?" "Very possible. It would have been much better if I had known beforehand. When I saw your face tonight, it felt like a miracle, as if God had brought you. Do you know why? Because for the first time in 3 years, I can wholeheartedly welcome you." Alyssa," he said, completely forgetting everything except the mystery of her words, his gray eyes darkening with eagerness. "What do you mean? Please tell me. These years have felt like centuries, and I've been waiting for your word all this time." She took a sharp breath, reaching out to grab the back of a chair. "It couldn't be spoken," she said, her voice trembling. "Not until today was I able to break the silence. And now, today?" She suddenly smiled at him, her eyes filled with promise. "God has been kind," she whispered, pulling out a crumpled envelope from within the lace of her waist. "Oh, so kind. Even when I doubted him. Look, I have kept this hidden there every moment since it first arrived. Even when I was on stage changing costumes, I couldn't bear to part with it for even a second. It was far too precious." She sank back into the chair, extending the paper toward him. "Read it yourself if my tears haven't made the lines illegible." He took it from her, his hands trembling, and pulled out the enclosure, a single sheet of rough yellow paper. He paused for a moment, glancing towards where she sat, her face buried in her arms across the chair back. Then he smoothed out the wrinkles and read slowly, carefully studying each pencil-written misspelled word, every fold and stain leaving an impression on his mind. San Juan Colo, December 12th, 1904. Dear Miss, I saw your name again in a Denver newspaper that Bill brought from town tonight, and read there that you were going to perform in a play in Chicago. I haven't seen your name in the papers for a long time. So I thought I'd write you a line because Bill thinks you never got the story straight about the way Biff Farnham died. He says that you and Mr. Carlton have the whole thing mixed up, and that maybe it's causing tension between the two of you. Now, I don't want to interfere in your affairs, and it's not pleasant for me to confess this way on paper. Not that I'm afraid or anything, it just doesn't look good. I also don't want anything I did to cause you folks a lot of trouble. That's not my style. I guess I must have been crazy when I did it because I was really messed up for 6 months afterwards, at least according to Bill. But it was me, all right, who killed Farnham. It wasn't murder as I see it, even though I was hunting him down, because he saw me first and had his gun out when I fired. Anyway, he got what he deserved, and I have no regrets. We're doing all right out here now, me and Bill. Our claim is paying big, but I never got over thinking about Mercedes. I sure loved her, and I still do. You were really good to her, and I think she would want me to tell you exactly how it was. Hoping this will clear up some of the troubles between you and Mr. Carlton, I am yours with respect, William Brown. Carlton stood there in silence, still holding the paper in his hand. Almost timidly, she looked up at him across the back of the chair. And you have never suspected who I was until tonight? No, never. I had always thought of Bob's sister as a young child. She stood up, taking a single step towards him. I can only ask you to forgive me, she pleaded anxiously, her eyes raised. That is all I can ask. I should be ashamed, I am ashamed, that I could ever have believed it possible for you to commit such an act. It seems unbelievable now that I believed it. But how could I escape that conviction? I heard the voices, the gunshot, and then a man ran past me in the dark. Some impulsive urge, a desire to help, made me quickly move forward. Just as I bent over the dead body, someone approached me from the same direction that man had fled. I thought he was coming back to make sure his work was done, and it was you. Oh, I didn't want to believe, but I had to believe. You acted so strangely towards me, I took that as a sign of guilt. It was a terrible horror. You actually thought I did that, he asked, hardly believing his own ears. What else could I think? What else could I think? This new realization stunned him, leaving him staring at her, completely unable to control his words. Should he tell her? Should he confess his own equally crazy mistake? The reason why all these years had passed without his pursuing her? It would be pointless. It would only add to her pain, her sense of hurt pride. Silence now would be mercy. Alyssa, he said, controlling his voice with an effort, let's consider all this as gone forever. Let's not talk about it. Let's not think about it anymore. You have achieved the goal you set out to achieve. Or maybe you haven't fully reached your ideal yet, but you have come a long way toward it. Has it satisfied you? Has it filled the emptiness in your life? She returned his questioning gaze honestly. Do you remember what I once said in a cabin out in Colorado? I think so. But to avoid any mistakes, say it again now. I told you I would gladly give up all ambition, all dreams of worldly success, just to be alone with the man I loved and make him happy. Tonight, as back then, that's all I want. Everything. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. Alyssa, he whispered, as if still partially afraid to ask the question. Am I everything you want? Yes, everything. Only you have to wait, Ned. I still belong to the public, and I have to finish my commitment. After that, it'll be home, and you. They stood there facing each other, the soft light from the shaded bulbs above shimmering in her dark hair, her cheeks flushed, her eyes smiling at him through a haze of tears. Unopposed, he pulled her close. The end. This concludes Western Serenade, written by Leitha Watson. Visit brooksaudiobooks.com for updates on the availability of new books and a special free offer.